A high-risk merchant is simply very basic level is a merchant that presents significant risk to the processor or a bank.
So James, I loved our talk today with Eugene. It's very rare that we get an attorney on the podcast.
Yeah.
And conversations with attorneys can get a little bit taxing, but I think our listeners are really going to get some actionable information out of this.
Yeah, definitely. I love how you kind of directed the conversation much more this one for the agent. So I think whether you're an ISO thinking about your agent relationships or you're an agent thinking about, your agreements and the structure of the industry, I thought Eugene did a fantastic job breaking down the risks and associated with that.
And then your segment, your questions from the field, I thought was really spot on this week as well.
Thank you.
Something about that?
Yeah, I've just been really, in some ways frustrated actually with some of the consulting clients I'm working with, the different things of just kind of this idea of just going on and prospecting. And, the world has changed and there's new ways to do prospecting that actually are much more effective than some of the old ways. And so I just lay out a really specific plan that I think everyone will agree will work better. The question is, are you going to execute on it? And that's what I talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great plan. I think people probably should execute on it if they're smart.
We'll see.
Most of the people that listen to us are. So
yeah, so we should have a good result.
And then my my insider's report is on PayPal's new attempt at a stable coin. And James and I talk about that. I think you'll find that interesting. And James?
Yeah, and then of course I always like to give my little disclaimer. In this one we're interviewing Eugene and Rome LLP. They don't sponsor us. They're not paid advertising, consulting, anything like that. And so with that being said, let's dive into this interview with Eugene.
Well, everybody, James and I are here today with my new friend, Eugene. Eugene, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Patty?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for joining us. This is great because, James, you and I have talked a lot about products and strategies. Yes. We don't have a lot of lawyers on.
No, we don't. So
and a lot of times we've been known to say, I am not a lawyer, but
right. Maybe it's time we have some more legal professionals that can say I am an attorney.
Right. So when Eugene reached out to me, I thought, oh, what an excellent opportunity. Sure. And so thank you. I really appreciate it, Eugene. Just for our folks, I know Eugene has a law practice in California. That's right. I asked him here today specifically because we want to talk about risk. We all know there's a lot of risk in the payment system, in payment processing, as well as issuancing, and different parties have different risk profiles and ways to mitigate risk. But before we get into all that, Eugene, can you just give us sort of like a brief synopsis of your professional background and what brought you to payments in the first place?
Of course, happy to do it. I've been a lawyer for now nearly 20 years, which is a daunting amount of time.
Daunting indeed.
Particularly for me, flew by. What brought me to payments was a job with an attorney who had at the time a smaller payments practice. I handled one case, next case. Then when I went out on my own, same thing happened. One case turned into two, turned into 10, turned into really dozens of clients across the spectrum, from ISOs to agents to banks in some instances to just a lot of merchants dealing with just a spectrum of processing issues, both transactional, litigation-wise. So yeah, a very substantial portion of our practice is dedicated to this kind of work.
I think it's because also, Eugene and James, you can chime in here, but there's so few lawyers that understand this space. Yeah. That when somebody finds somebody who does,
the word spreads,
spreads really quick.
Yeah. So, Eugene, it's so interesting too. It's like our industry, we have all these like interconnected parties between, the visa agreements and how they, cascade down, and then you have the sponsor bank, and then you have, it's just crazy, all of the layers, so
I'm glad you touched on that. And one thing that we see routinely is business lawyers handling payment processing cases. And I'm not looking to disparage such lawyers. In fact, some of them are spectacular attorneys. The only problem is they don't really understand the interplay between the card brand rules and best practices, and then the risk factors between ISOs, acquirers, and obligations to the car brands running
Right.
back and forth.
Right.
And so what happens is they will litigate cases, just business practitioners, from just a business standpoint. It'll be breach of contract, maybe some kind of claim for unpaid funds, but they don't deal in a robust fashion with the standards set out by Visa and MasterCard regs. And a lot of times that's a tremendous disservice to the parties they're representing. So a lot of times we come into a case that comes to us from a large firm with really smart attorneys, really good lawyers that simply have not practiced in this very esoteric space.
Right.
And certain things do not get addressed. On our end, we get experts involved very early in our cases, even though we have a wealth of expertise, but on certain things, we find that having someone who's done nothing but payments, but from the business side, from the corporate side, rather
Right.
than the
Right.
legal side, is invaluable. And we have a lot of relationships with capable experts in the space. And so you're right, it is a very unique space, and the interplay of all of these items makes it such that you really want someone who understands them all representing you, especially in a matter that might be somewhat nuanced.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's get to our discussion. I'm really eager to discuss this with you. Risk, okay? And I want to differentiate between merchant risk, which we talk about a lot. That's mostly like fraud type things, and agent risk. And I'm wondering if you can maybe address for us some of the risks that agents face when they, put applications in, and even after that, in terms of their agreements with ISOs.
Happy to do that.
Mhm.
I suppose agents face risk, and risk is a very broad word, but they would face risk both from the up the chain players and from the down the chain players. And what I mean by that is the following. Suppose you have, just colloquially speaking, a merchant comes forward and says, look, I want to do $50,000 a month in business. The person's materials check out, their proposed sales, the items they want to sell, check out. They underwrite them, and they submit the application to an ISO with whom they have an agreement, and they start processing. Suddenly, it turns out that the merchant is not whom they represent themselves to be. They sell a different product, or perhaps they sell it through means that are different than what they suggested they would. And the question becomes, who's responsible? Well, the responsibility, obviously, at the very high level, the acquirer would be responsible, because if all of the sales turn out to be fraudulent and the customers start charging back, it's the acquirer that's on the hook. Acquirer, of course, would have an agreement with the ISO that makes the ISO responsible. The ISO, in turn, would have some form of an agreement with the agent, and that's where the agent risk comes into play. And in that situation, it becomes a question of, well, what's the risk? Is the agent contractually on the hook for any kind of shortfalls experienced by the bank as a result of the merchant activity? Is the agent insulated from that by the terms of the contract, where all the risk passes to the ISO, where the agent says, look, all I do is find potential merchants. I do not guarantee that they're forthright actors. All I'm doing is collecting prospects for you, the ISO. I'm collecting some of their information. I'm collecting documents that you have told me to collect. I'm putting that packet together. I'm sending it to you. And I, the agent, make absolutely no guarantees about the validity of these materials. You, the ISO, are far better equipped to vet out the merchant. And so that's entirely on you.
Is that is something that needs to be contractually negotiated?
Absolutely. The
Yes.
contract really is the starting point for all relationships between the agent and the ISO, who would be looking to the agent, presumably, in the event that things go sideways. Of course, the other extreme of that is that the entirety of the risk is placed upon the agent by the ISO, in which case the agent is fully responsible for all of the merchant's transgressions.
Mhm.
And in fact, at times I've seen it where instances where the merchant's transgressions, well, let me take a step back. As we know, the agent receives a small sliver of what everyone in the up chain, in the processing chain makes. So then let's say they get 1%. However, if, and this is again an extreme scenario, but if the merchant does, let's say, $100,000 a month in volume, and let's say the whole 100,000 of it is fraud, and it's all chargebacks, or even 50% of it, you get into a situation where the agent becomes responsible, assuming they carry all risk for that merchant, but they become responsible for far more of the damage that merchant causes to the ISO and the acquirer than the agent ever stood to gain from that relationship, assuming zero chargebacks and everything goes fully above board. And certainly there are situations where the agent is viewed to be responsible, whether contractually or otherwise, and the ISO starts debiting or holding back the agent's residuals flowing
on all of their accounts.
On all of
Right.
them.
on all accounts.
Yeah.
And that's something that, you know, experienced agents certainly take into account when initially contracting, and so they consider it. That goes into their analysis of what kind of merchants they're going to bring in, goes into their analysis of what kind of contracts they sign. But certainly I could see how someone new to the space, someone who certainly goes into it without any initial or even subsequent intent to do anything untoward, could be taken advantage of, both by a merchant who sees a weak agent that might overlook some red flags,
Mhm.
and correspondingly by the ISO who shifts all risk to that agent. And then one bad apple, so to speak, from the merchant portfolio may create a situation where the agent really stops getting paid on all other legitimately referred merchants.
Right.
And that's a really tough reality, especially
Yeah.
for agents who, you know, just talking about bargaining power and also scope of operations, agents tend to be 1 or 2 person shops, 3-person shops. They do not have the robust tools that ISOs, and certainly there are some really large ISOs with really comprehensive and elaborate technological solutions and just manpower. They can vet out the merchants far better than an agent could. An agent could be just someone who thinks, look, I've got a list of potential
Got a
merchants.
warm hand.
Yeah, and I will make some
I'm gonna
calls.
sell it something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. we
and
get you.
so
Yeah.
they just they're often truly not equipped to delve that deeply into a merchant's operations to really figure out whether they're an above board player or not. But if they're not well protected, contractually speaking, then they can get stuck for quite a bit of the damage flowing from the merchant's sales and other operations.
Well, yeah, and it's like your example of, you know, you have $100,000 a month merchant. And I think for those that are maybe newer to the industry, you know, they may not understand this concept of, you know, there's a merchant processing $100,000 in transactions. Well, if all of those transactions, to your point, are fraudulent, well, the merchant, the agent may only be making 1% or $1,000 a month residual, which is actually a pretty good residual on a 100,000 a month account. Maybe that's on a dual pricing or something, but they're making $1,000, but there's $100,000 in total risk. And so who's on the hook for that? Now, one thing that would be helpful, I think, Eugene, for our audience, for those who maybe aren't as familiar with even the concept of a high risk account,
Yeah.
can you
yeah.
can you maybe define a little bit of, like, when we're talking about these merchants that are creating this risk, what is a high risk merchant? Maybe give us a couple of the key driving factors that make a merchant a higher risk to whoever is on the hook for that risk.
Sure, happy to do it. By the way, I'm glad you asked, because the term high risk merchant is not something that's specifically
Exactly.
defined by anyone.
Right.
Right.
It's, and I've in advance, in preparation for my call with you, I looked over what some processors, what some industry commentators have described as a high risk merchant, and as expected, the definition varies.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Right.
You know, a high risk merchant is simply very basic level, is a merchant that presents significant risk to the processor or a bank. Significant means just increased. So
But
certainly anyone doing business online, to me, without a brick and mortar, I think would present an instance of elevated risk. Brick and mortar, let's say you have a shoe store. Well, presumably there's assets there. There's a live person. That business is not going
right,
to
you're not just
disappear
selling it
overnight.
over the internet.
Well,
Right.
they won't disappear overnight. And also with such a merchant, an aggrieved customer can actually walk in and
Right.
attempt a return.
Say these shoes don't fit, you know.
Well, that's exactly the case. And
Right.
so, the chargebacks, which is what the processors and banks really care about, would be a last resort. And my expectation is that with brick and mortar merchants, unless they're doing something truly exotic, chargebacks are not a significant issue unless there really is something unique. But I think that would be an outlier. Anything done online is a bit more risky, because a lot of times, and not often, but sometimes, you don't know who the ultimate seller is. People offer goods and services through a number of outlets. A lot of times they use affiliate networks, who also,
Sure.
as you might know, contract with various publishers. The publishers sometimes engage in advertising practices that are just not what the merchant ever wanted them to do. In fact, not what the affiliate network ever wanted them to do. And that increases risk. But otherwise, it could be just a merchant that sells items at a very high dollar per transaction.
Like a jewelry store.
It could be a jewelry store. It could be an electronics vendor.
Right, electronics. I was thinking of that. Yeah.
It could be just about anything where, if there is a kind of persistent issue, the risk of exposure is significant. So I can't say that it's necessarily confined to a particular industry.
Right.
Certainly,
But certainly you wouldn't expect like a pizza shop to have a lot of chargebacks, right? I mean,
no, you would not.
Once you've eaten the meal, what can you do?
Right. You can call and complain and leave a bad review.
Yeah, leave a bad review, but you're not going to get your money back.
Well, I think the other thing, Eugene, that's interesting about this is we're talking here about financial risk, right? So there are certain verticals that pose reputational risk,
right?
Right. We don't want to deal with CBD. We don't want to deal with, adult entertainment or whatever.
Right.
Right. But I think it's, from a financial risk perspective, it's about the chargebacks, right? The other one I was thinking of, Eugene, that does to pop up a lot would be business types that, sell things, but they take payment up front, travel agency, right? Things like that, where they're higher risk. Because, there's a lot of money hanging out there that hasn't really been, they haven't provided services for the money that they've received.
Right. And no one would view, the sale of Delta plane tickets as something that would be reputationally speaking problematic.
Right.
But flights are high risk for the very reason you described. You buy a ticket for $10,000 to go first class somewhere. Things change in the half a year that you have between the time that you bought the ticket and when the flight is. Can't return them because the rules are very, very stringent on. I think you can really cancel your flight acquisition only within the first 24 hours, unless you have a fully refundable ticket, which are astronomically expensive typically. And so, the people that feel, look, I'm not going on that trip. I want my money back.
Right.
They might be inclined to.
That's why they have travel insurance.
Yeah. They might be inclined to just call and initiate some chargeback that's totally invalid.
It's so funny. I was not going to share. I had no intention of sharing the story.
I'm wondering if you were going to share that story. Go ahead.
So it's so funny, Eugene. You just bring up Delta tickets, first class. So my wife and I just went to Boston for our 16th wedding anniversary. And I was the one that arranged the travel for reasons passing understanding. I did not have my assistant do it, which is always a mistake. And we get to the airport to leave, and I have first class Delta tickets, as you point out, very expensive, And I get to the airport and they won't check us in. And I'm really frustrated. And finally I'm showing my wife, and she looks at it and realizes that the date that I booked them for was actually the previous day.
Oh my God.
So I'm at the airport with my wife trying to get back home to our kids, and I actually don't have plane tickets. So it's actually interesting because this is a great example of, hey, there's thousands of dollars there that I'm going to be reaching out to Delta to try and get my money back. They may refuse. Do I file a
Right.
chargeback, or do I just accept the fact that I was really stupid? Right. And so all of a sudden there's a financial risk to the processor that, hey, I might want my money back on this stupidity, or because of
Right.
maybe something else that changes. But yeah, it's true. There's definitely that financial risk. So
Yeah.
I had to share that because you
No,
brought the Delta first class tickets. I had to.
when I
you know.
saw he posted this on Facebook the other day, Eugene, and when I saw it,
Yeah.
I just laughed. It was very funny.
Yes.
Hey,
Yes.
let's turn to the merchant level sales reps. Okay. I
Sure.
would like to know from you, Eugene, having been somebody that's looked over a lot of contracts and worked with a lot of ISOs and agents. What other than, I mean, you know, we discussed one of the potential problem, but what are some of the problematic clauses that you've seen that you think agents should avoid when signing an agreement with an ISO?
Okay, so we're tabling the question of risk. So just to button that up,
Yes.
obviously, I would be looking
Well, I
at
wouldn't totally table the question of risk because I think that this kind of ties in with that.
it does. So first things first, of course, I would want to make sure that the agent understands what they're taking on, and it could be, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, because some
Right.
processors might say, look, or ISOs might say, we simply don't need you if you're saying you're just going to submit applications and take zero accountability. But it could be 10%, 50%, 30%, or it could be up to a certain dollar amount, or it could be confined to your residuals for that merchant, as opposed to your residuals,
All
the
across
agent's
the board.
residuals, all across. So that,
Right.
you know, you submit a bad merchant, you won't get paid on that merchant, and that's fair. But for it to impact everyone else and all your other funds might be problematic. Okay, pivoting away from the allocation of that risk issue, I think the first thing would be exclusivity. And I don't think that an agent should ever sign an exclusive deal. I think I don't know what the benefit would be, maybe somewhat better rates, but then you are beholden to that particular ISO. And I don't know if there is a expectation in the industry that merchant level sales rep only writes to a particular ISO. So that would be one thing. I would also recommend to the agent to scrutinize the Schedule A. Look at the markups, look at what fees are being shared, because it may well be, suppose you have a 50-50 deal with an ISO. That seems fair, but then you start looking really closely and, you know, the cost to an ISO of a chargeback might be, let's say, $6. The ISO charges 26 or 36. So they get that $30 amount based on the number of anticipated chargebacks or actual chargebacks. In the event of a merchant that experienced a lot of them, that could be a substantial revenue source for the ISO. But that Schedule A may also say that we will not share any of our chargeback fees with you, or our ACH reject fees, or in other words, there may be fees that are carved out where you're confined only to the buy rate. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong or right with it, because these are business relationships. So the idea is you have some freedom to negotiate a contract. There's nothing against public policy here.
Right.
But I would suggest that if people say, well, let's go 50-50, and you go, sounds great, send the agreement, and the agent signs it without looking at it, they might not be truly realizing 50% of what the ISO really makes on that relationship.
Right.
Well, I think it's interesting too, Eugene, it kind of goes back to exclusivity, right? Because, you know, that mistake is a bad mistake. If it's an exclusive deal, it's a really bad mistake, because now you are exclusive. I think in my experience, the only time I've seen exclusivity make any sense is if you're an ISO that's really trying to scale up and grow. Well, you might do a financial deal with an upstream partner where they're like, hey, we're going to invest $1 million or whatever for you to build your ISO. But obviously, we want you to bring all your deals to us, or at least first right of refusal. But I think, yeah, to your point, beyond that, if you're an individual agent, be careful. You sign that exclusivity. Next thing you know, like, you know, most agreements Eugene have, you know, they can change whatever they want, right? Like, and so you're exclusive. That's a problem, you know?
Yeah.
And consider maybe the initial term for which you're signing. because again, if
Mhm.
it's an untested partner, maybe don't go the full 3 years, maybe do it for a year and see how that shakes out.
Right.
Mhm.
The other item that I think agents should really think about are residuals.
Well, yeah, and again, that kind of comes to our risk topic, doesn't it?
Sure, but what I mean by that is not purely, how much are they getting and what percentage they're getting, but the question of how long are they going to get them for?
What's the risk of losing the residuals?
Right, and I mean, it could be a perfectly innocuous reason. In other words, there could be just a personality clash, between, in other words, where the agent has done nothing wrong and the ISO has done nothing wrong, and the two of them look at each other and say, we don't want to do business together anymore, and the contract terminates. Let's say the first term expired, whether it's a year or 3 years, whatever the case may be. Well, the merchants that were referred are still with that ISO, so the ISO is making money, and the question becomes, well, shouldn't the party, the agent that referred them, collect some percentage of that profit?
Mhm.
And does the percentage change after termination? That's an open question. Again, one to be dictated by contract. And equally, if say the percentage remains static, but the question then is, well, for how long do they get paid? Is it a lifetime of the merchant? Is it only 12 months? Is it something different? Is there a right to a buyout? If there is one, at what amount? So all of that can be addressed by a contract, but the point is you really have to think through not just what's immediate. Look, I as the agent, I sign this piece of paper. I'm going to refer merchant A. Merchant A is going to do some sales, and I'll get my, let's hope, 1%. And that's that. Well, you really should think through the eventualities of what happens when the relationship does not go the way it was planned, or what happens when the merchant doesn't behave the way the merchant was intended to behave or said it would behave. What happens if I just want to stop doing business with that ISO? Or what happens if I, as the agent, want to sell my portfolio? And that's actually another interesting question, the portability of residuals, so to speak.
Mhm.
Right.
Some agreements I've seen, they stipulate that if there's a change in control or if there's a sale, then the contract terminates and kind of all bets are off. So the ISO stays with all the keeps all the referred merchants.
Right.
They realize now all the profit that they
Right.
now no longer have to share. So I think as an agent, to some degree, you have to maybe not even contemplate the prospect of doing a sale of your portfolio of residuals, which by the way are very valuable.
Right.
But it certainly wouldn't hurt to say, look, even though I might not be wanting to leave the industry or sell my portfolio, but a contract that provides favorable terms in the event of a sale is just more valuable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
especially in an industry where that happens so much. Our industry
Right.
is private equity firms are buying and rolling up companies, and everybody's being acquired and sold. And so I think the idea, a lot of agents, Eugene will tell me, oh, I know Bill over at this company, and I shook his hand, and we're,
Yeah.
and then I just signed the agreement. We're good. And it's like, well, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Bill's not gonna have anything to do with that company in 3 years because they're gonna sell to a private equity firm, and Bill's gonna retire. So
And that's exactly it. And when private
Yeah.
equity comes in, the only thing they'll be looking at is their bottom line. They won't know the
Yeah.
agent. They won't care that Bill used to have drinks with that agent every Friday night and their kids
Right.
went to baseball camp together. And this happens.
How do we increase EBITDA? That is the only question
Right.
they will
That
ask.
is
That's the
only
question, right?
and
Right.
that is the only question. And
Yeah.
look,
And-
you have to anticipate that. I mean, I don't think there should be any kind of sentiment ascribed to it. I think people act in their financial interests, and certainly the agent has the right to do the same exact thing.
Right.
Much
And
as
I
the
think
ISOs.
that's like the bottom line, most excellent piece of advice that our listeners can get from this today, James, is that, you really have to be careful of what you get yourself into. And you should read those contracts. And if you're lucky enough to know a lawyer, maybe have them read them as well before you sign them. James, I think we kind of covered the other questions, so I was
Absolutely.
wondering if you wanted to do a wrap.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. And so Eugene, I mean, obviously we keep talking about this for another hour, but we better not do that today. But Eugene, this has been super interesting. We didn't know each other before the podcast interview, so it's really been nice just talking to you, getting to know you.
Likewise.
I know a lot of our listeners are always looking for an attorney in the industry. They're in very short supply, as we discussed. Where would people go if they want to learn more about you and inquire about your practice?
Sure. They can visit our website, romellp.com. So it's ROMELLP.com. And they can email me directly at erome@romellp.com. The law firm is Rome LLP.
Awesome.
We're around. So
Eugene, thank you. This has
Thank you.
really been helpful. I know that when you and I first spoke, I was like kind of all over the place, and you helped me narrow down our discussion. And I think it's been a really fruitful discussion. So thank you.
likewise, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, everybody. So just want to put a little plug in for an event I've got coming up. I will have information more for this, but you can go to ccsalespro.com/Nativia to learn more about this. But our sponsor, Nativia Banking, I'm going to be doing a special live event where we're going to be talking about ISO banking. Now, this is really going to be a cool event. I'm interviewing Vlad. I'm interviewing Izzy from over there at Nativia. And what we're going to be talking about is for agents and ISOs. So they have this opportunity. I don't want to do like to spoil the whole thing or whatever, but the idea is when you are managing your residuals through Nativia's banking app, because they're so familiar with the industry, not only do they have unique tools and give you cash back rewards and all of that, but they're also working on rolling out programs for access to capital at a really affordable rate. And so, historically it's been, you got to sell your residuals or this type of thing. And so Nativia is working on solutions to that. And so we're going to touch on that in this event. So say that one more time, ccsalespro.com/NETEVIA, Nativia.
Yes,
So check it out and get registered for that event. And then we'll talk more about it then.
I'm looking forward to it.
So Patty, today I want to talk about campaign marketing.
Excellent topic.
Yeah, so I have something really exciting coming. I don't know when this one is going to air. I think it'll air pretty soon. So probably in a few weeks after this podcast airs, I'm doing some new YouTube videos that are going to be like nothing I've ever done. So I actually have hired a new full-time person to basically follow me around in the field, 3 or 4 days a week in the mornings, and I'm going to go sell payment processing.
Oh, you were talking about this. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I've been planning that, and I've been asking a lot of the kind of questions that the agents ask me, which, in consulting clients, which is, okay, I'm going to go sell a merchant. Who am I going to sell? What am I going to sell to them? How am I going to get in contact with them? Right. So just very basic questions that when you go to execute them, it's just so interesting to me because Patty, the one of the trends I've noticed that I think is so important for our listeners is that if it feels like prospecting is getting harder, you're not imagining it. It is getting harder.
Yeah,
I've been back out in the field, and I was out in the field 12 years ago, and it is harder.
Yeah.
Now, can it still be done? Absolutely. Are there people who are absolutely killing it? Absolutely. Right. And yes, it can definitely be done in a general way of walking into businesses off the street. I still believe in that. And I think it's a great way to get started in the industry and to get data about your market and all of that. But as far as how I personally, believe in making sales, no, the way I believe in making sales is with campaign marketing. And I did this way back in the day as well. I figured out really quickly that it just works a lot better for me. And so let me explain what I mean by campaign marketing. And I'm going to give everybody a very simple roadmap of exactly what you do to make this work. Okay. This is not an extremely valuable idea. This is a really valuable execution. And if you can execute this, you'll understand it instantly when I explain it to you. But if you can execute on it, you can make a lot of money. So number one is you choose a specific segment of the market that you want to target with a campaign. Okay. Choose that segment based on either business type or based on solution, right? So you may have a certain solution that you say, this is a good solution for, these 3 types of businesses. Or you may have something that says, I'm going to go after bars, or I'm going to go after whatever, right? A certain business type. And so, you first pick that, make sure you have the right solution, the right partner for the solution, the technology. that the payments is fully integrated into it. You make sure you have a streamlined, sign up process.
Right.
Check the boxes to make sure it's a seamless experience for you and for your merchants, and that you understand the experience, right?
Mhm.
Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to create a free bit of educational content, okay, that you can share with these people that's going to be valuable to them.
Mhm.
Okay, valuable to them. That's very, very important. And so if you're going to go after, I don't know, let's say you're going to go after pizza shops, which is one of my favorites. You might make something called five dangers of choosing a pizza shop POS system, or 3 hidden costs in pizza shop payments, or whatever. So you can go like
Yeah.
a negative direction like that of dangers or risks,
Or
or you can go in a positive
yeah.
way, and
Mhm.
3 keys to efficiency, whatever. So you come up with that. Then what you do is, when you cold call on the business type, in this case, a pizza shop, you
Right.
can call them over the phone. You can walk in either way, but the pitch is, hey, I work specifically with pizza shops. I provide point of sale solutions. And so I'm a local business. My success depends on the success of the local pizza shops in the area. So I created a free resource for local pizza shops. And the only reason I'm calling you today, or the only reason I'm stopping by today, is I wanted to give you that free resource and see if you'd have a chance to take a look at it. I know you're going to get some value from it. That's it. That's your opening pitch. Now,
Uh-huh.
what you're going to find when you do that is that your closing rate's going to be 25%, 30%. If you're in person, it's going to be 50%. And, when you're talking to people and you basically say, I want to give you a free ebook and it's about your business, they're going to say yes. And that's the only reason you're there. They're going to say yes. And then when they say yes, you get the email address, you share that with them. Okay. Next step is you see if they engage with that. Okay. And you can do that in any email system, MailChimp, HubSpot, whatever you're going to use, Constant Contact. You can see which people clicked on the email. And in every situation, you can even get an alert that says, when somebody clicks on the email, notify me.
Uh-huh.
Now, in my experience, we're doing this for a couple different of our businesses. We're going to get, what's crazy with this first email, we're usually going to get something like a 50 to 60% click rate.
Really?
Yes.
That's unheard of.
It's incredible. Now, you don't get that after the first one, but it's because you're talking to them and you got to send it to them in real time and like, okay, hey, I just sent you that email. So check that, And so again, as long as it's relevant and valuable, then they're going to click on it. When they click on it, guess what you do? You follow up with them. Okay.
Right.
And obviously your educational resource should give you the talking points that you need to follow up and have that conversation with them. And then from the conversation, you then have your normal sales process and you go into your demo, or you go into what your cost analysis or statement analysis or whatever, depending on what you're selling and who you're selling it to. But when we think about campaign marketing, I really, really believe that this is the biggest missed opportunity right now in our industry because of a couple of things, Patty. One is everybody in our industry has decided that telemarketing is worthless now. Almost
I noticed that. Yeah.
We used to do that. That doesn't work anymore. You could never outsource it. That's just doesn't work anymore. That's actually not true. It does work. You just can't do it the way you used to do it. You can't call people and say, we want to save you money on payment processing. That's a brutal numbers game because nobody's going to say yes.
Right.
If you call and say, hey, we designed a free ebook and we want to give it to you, guess what? You're going to get a lot of people that are going to say yes to that. And, think about this for a second. Imagine a large processor that has agents all over the country. Well, if you gave all of your agents, 10, 15, 20 merchants a month, where you said, hey, this merchant downloaded this ebook
Go
about
check them out. Right.
whatever, right? And we told them that we'd have somebody stop by and follow up, right? Are they going to get more sales? Yeah, those agents are going to stop in. And as long as it was a good ebook that added value, that was a good piece of content, the people are going to say, wow, that's fantastic. If you really want to go over the top and you want to make a lot of money on this strategy, then you do a podcast. You start like I mentioned, other recent ones, we have a podcast for self-storage property owners right now for our software. And every week when all the people, we have thousands of email addresses, when they click that link, well, that notifies us and we call them, hey, hope you're enjoying our podcast. We'd love to do a free demo for you, right? So that's where you start building the top-down funnel, into this. And so telemarketing can still work if you use the strategy, right? But the other thing is, for salespeople, it's very challenging right now to get out in the field and just have these initial conversations. If you give the salespeople something that they can talk to people about, that's going to give a positive impression and a good feeling to the merchant, it's just going to be much, much more effective and get you off to a better start. So
I agree. I mean, it has everything to do with presentation. I mean,
it does. It
yeah,
does.
yeah.
And you got to add value. But, I would really challenge our listeners. If you're an individual agent, you may need to partner with your payment processing company to get this type of content. Go to Upwork.com, hire writers, hire designers.
Or you could hire me.
You hire Patty Murphy. What's your website, Patty? I know you just have a new one, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I have a brand new website. It's Proscribes, PROSCRIBES.net. Proscribes.net. I'm happy to help people with their marketing.
I love it.
Stuff.
I love it. And that's the problem, the biggest challenge with this is getting the right written content that's relevant and valuable. And so that's something that you can work with Patty on, because you need somebody who's an expert in the payments industry to write this up. Then go to Upwork to get your graphic designer. If you're a small shop, if you're a larger company, have your team do it, design it and make it available. Give your team the resources they need to be able to start conversations, not with, hey, can you give me some time to do a demo?
Yeah.
But can I give you some valuable content? And I just think it's going to go a lot better for you.
That's excellent advice. Thank you, James. PayPal has announced a new stable coin, but it's going to face some headwinds.
Really? I didn't hear about this. I thought you were about to say about the new CEO, because didn't they, I think Discover and PayPal just changed CEOs. I was like, oh, I thought we were about to hear about that.
Oh,
and then stable coin.
I've been waiting for Schumann to leave for a while. He keeps saying he will, but
right. So that was kind of old news to you, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Well, we can touch on.
We can go back on that another time. Yeah.
Right,
so.
another time. But what I wanted to talk about this week is how PayPal is trying to dig deeper into the world of crypto.
Okay. Very interesting.
With a stable coin that it's calling PayPal USD.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now, just in case people out there don't know, a stable coin is basically crypto. It's a crypto token whose monetary value is pegged to a stable asset like the US dollar. So PayPal customers already can buy, sell, and transfer select cryptocurrencies using their PayPal wallets. And they can even pay with crypto. We've talked to a few people about that. But now it wants to pay customers to purchase these PayPal USD tokens, as well as convert any cryptocurrency into PayPal USD, transfer PayPal USD to comparable external wallets, send P2P payments using it, or fund purchases. But here's the problem. Federal regulators don't like the idea of big tech companies getting into crypto. Now, you may recall that back in 2019, when Meta was Facebook, it had a plan to launch a stable coin called Libra.
Yep.
Until regulators balked at that, And this time, within days of PayPal announcing this new stable coin, the Fed issued a supervisory letter to all the banks in its jurisdiction, informing them that they have to get supervisory permission to get involved in the stablecoin, in any kind of stablecoin business. Wow. So that means that the bank that PayPal's working with, it's Paxos, technically has to get permission to do this with PayPal. And there's one other problem about this company, Paxos. It's being investigated by the SEC and the New York Department of Financial Services over its relationship with Binance. Is that how you pronounce that? Binance?
Binance, yeah.
Binance, yeah. Which, of course, made headlines earlier this year, for operating as an unregistered securities exchange.
Right.
And then there's Congress. The day after PayPal announced this, Representative Maxine Waters, who's the ranking Democrat on the House Banking Committee, used to chair it, said she is, quote, deeply concerned about PayPal launching a stable coin absent federal regulatory framework. Now, the U.S. House actually has been working on that, and they passed a bill called the Clarity for Payment Stablecoins Act of 2023.
Wow. Okay.
And that was approved by the Banking Committee, still has to be approved by the full House, but that's a start. And the bill does call for bank-like regulation of non-bank issuers of stable coins, with state regulators being the primary regulator and the Fed stepping in for what they call exigent circumstances.
Sure. Yeah, I
I
wonder
love
what
that
that.
term.
Yeah, I do. I always do too, because nobody knows what it means, right?
Nobody knows what it means.
It means
Yeah.
whenever they want to step in, they're going to step in.
Whatever they want, exactly.
That's
So
funny.
this bill, though, it's an amalgam of about 5 other bills on stablecoins. So the vote by the committee, was pretty important. It was pretty much along party lines, but we'll see what's going on. PayPal said in a statement that it's positioned this new stablecoin as something of an educational product. Quote, PayPal is focused on increasing consumer and merchant comprehension of cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, and central bank digital currencies while working closely with regulators as the industry evolves.
Wow. Well, it'll
So
be very, very interesting to see how this shapes up. Well, it's funny because when you were first saying it, I didn't know about any of this, but when you were first describing it, I was thinking, wow, that is like a perfect, PayPal is perfect
perfect.
for creating a stable coin. I mean, that's kind of what they are anyway now, if you think about it. And I mean, not from a crypto perspective, but as far
No,
as a value proposition,
but from a wallet perspective.
yeah, that's how they've kind of been they've kind of been the stable coin for the internet for years
Yeah,
in a weird
yeah.
way. And so sounds like a really good fit for them if they can just get it through regulation.
Just
and
get it
everything.
through regulations, if they can
Yeah.
somehow figure out a way to get this House bill over to the Senate,
Right.
But,
Right.
we will see. I've watched grass grow faster than lawmakers make laws, but
No doubt about that. That's for sure. Yeah. So, well, definitely keep us in the loop. It'll be interesting to see how it goes.
sure
So.
thing, James.